So as noted, to get us started, we have 4 incredible trailblazers here with us today. We have Everjoice Wynn, who is an activist in her country, Zimbabwe, and also globally. She's one of the founders of the Zimbabwe National Constitutional Assembly and has worked in several other organizations like the Pan-African Women in Law and Development in Africa. Till recently, she was ActionAid International's Director for Programs and Global Engagement. She's also a writer, a blogger, and an active social media influencer. Welcome, Everjoice. We also have with us Ejin Tan, who is an advocacy champion with the World Association of Girl Guides and Girl Scouts. She's a law student in Malaysia and played a huge part in the national campaign to end child marriage in Malaysia in 2018. Welcome, Ejin. And we have Sarah Anna Awad, a youth activist and external representative of the World Association of Girl Guides and Girl Scouts again. She is also a member of the Advisory Council on Youth, leading on the portfolios of Euro-Arab Youth Cooperation and Youth Peace and Security. And finally, we have Phumzile Mlambo-Ngcuka, the Executive Director of UN Women, who was also from 2000 to 2008, the Deputy President of South Africa, a member of Parliament from 1994 to 1996. Welcome one and all. We are absolutely delighted to have you here with us. So as noted, this is meant to be a very lively conversation amongst all of us. I'll start with an opening question that I'd love for each of you to share some thoughts on. So the backdrop against which we're celebrating Generation Equality Forum has shifted pretty radically since it was first envisioned. The pandemic has had an outsized impact on women. We see violence rising. We see greater disparities, both socially and economically for women and girls. There are challenges. We might also reframe it more positively and say that this disruption has also provided opportunities potentially for women and girls. So today, as we discuss the importance of intergenerational activism and intersectional youth leadership, and particularly as we think about Generation Equality Forum and the action coalitions, what do you think is most important for us to keep in mind? And I'd like to start with you, Sarah.
Hi, everyone. I hope everyone of you is safe and well out there in the world. I'm talking to you from Vienna. And so my answer to the question would be that I think it's very important that we understand that intergenerational working is actually a huge benefit. So it's one of the best things that can work or happen to us, since there's lots of experiences coming from, it doesn't matter what age you are. So I think when we just work together, yeah, we have a lot of opportunities. And I think this is one of the things that I want to mention. And the other thing is that we need to be aware of intersectional discrimination, which means that we need to be intentional also in our thinking about who is the most disadvantaged and ensure that we build a connection with them so they can voice their challenges, which also goes perfectly along with sparking the global and local conversations among generations. And I think we also must create the spaces for them and give them the access that is needed so that our collective efforts include their needs and also recognize the additional forms of discrimination. So there's a lot of things happening. And I think that we have together to push for action so that we truly leave no one behind. And I know I'm very honored that I'm on this panel, but I'm also aware that I'm one of the people that is very privileged because I'm in a safe place. And I have the access to the internet, I have hardware. So I think that we need to also look at the people actually working with those people who need support. And I think one of them is especially youth and women's NGOs that we need to partner with because they are the experts. They are working with the grassroots. And for that example, we are focusing on victim blaming in our campaign as WAGs. And I think this is something where I would like to say that we need to pledge that we're not victim blaming. So I want to bring this up in all our minds. And I hope that everyone is aware what traumas are caused also by this. And yeah, so that would be my answer. And I would love to pass the floor to Everjoice.
Thanks, Sarah. You know, that really gives me, I think, a good place to pick up from. I think for me, just maybe 3 or 4 things that I want to highlight. I think the first, again, picking up from what you were talking about, Sarah, is disasters, emergencies, as the one that we are living in right now, have both massive challenges, and there are many, but they also provide massive opportunity, you know, for change, for organizing, in all parts of the world. And I think, again, to agree with what younger women, really coming to the table.
Everjoice, we're just having some trouble making you out.
Issues on the agenda. Some of these issues, I would say old issues that we've always known, whether it's,
So Everjoice, my apologies. We can't make you out. So perhaps I'll pass the question to Ejin, and we'll work with Everjoice to see if we can get her connection restored. So Ejin, over to you.
Okay, thanks, Elise. So I think we must include meaningful youth participation. And this means including young people in decision-making process, allowing us insight into problems that they face. And we shouldn't just include them just for the sake of including them. We need to listen to them, listen to what they have to say, invite them to the table, especially those from marginalized communities. Only then we can recognize and address their needs. And action coalitions must truly represent the voice of young people. This includes getting all the stakeholders to reach out and consult young people around the world. We don't want leaders who come up with agenda that they think is what young people want and need, because we are growing up in different times. The problems we face, the experiences that we go through are unique to the times that we are in. And all we ask for is those in decision-making positions to talk to us, listen to us, and really value our opinion so that resources can be allocated efficiently and to really bring about a truly equal generation. And I think another point I would like to make is accessibility, like what Sarah mentioned earlier. When the pandemic hit, the digital divide became very, very serious. Internet connection, digital devices became a necessity that a lot of people can only dream of. And when there is a lack of accessibility, young girls, women, young people in general, they're easily left out from the discussion. We want girls from young rural areas or less privileged backgrounds to feel heard because their voices matter. Their lack of access to a lot of resources have already made them a very vulnerable section of the community. So we must include ways to provide resources for them, take into account how to reach out to them, tailor it to local needs. For example, like partnering with local organizations or libraries. So for example, at WACS, we have the Voices Against Violence. It is a non-formal education curriculum co-developed by WACS and the UN Women. So this is to empower girls and young women locally to take leadership and action to end gender-based violence. That's all for me.
Thank you. Phumzile, I wonder what your thoughts are about this question.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi, did you call me?
We can hear you well, yes. Curious what you're noticing, yes.
No, thank you so much. And greetings to everyone who is on the call. It's lovely to see all of you. 2020 is a big year for women and for gender equality. And we had big plans for 2020, including rededicating ourselves for intergenerational engagements and mobilizing youth and making sure that we give true meaning to intergenerational collaboration. I am just so happy that we had this as part of the plan for 2020. Could you imagine if we had this pandemic in 2020 and we didn't have generation equality to assist us to have a platform to re-energize each other? I think we would have been in a much worse off situation. And we recognize that for the unfinished business of the Beijing Declaration, we actually need a plan for succession. And that succession means a solid, meaningful, deep investment in young people who are the ones that are already doing the work and will be on their 2 feet when we're in our 3 legs to take the work further. I think it's very important for us to leverage whatever lessons learned that the previous generations bring in with an open mind to see the world from the eyes and the perspectives of those who are seeing a completely new world from the ones that we lived in, especially because there is just so much that has changed that we can never understand because we just have not experienced the world in the same way. It's important also to recognize that the diversity of actors in fighting for gender equality enriches the outcomes and the quality of the results that we get. Women in all their diversity, as well as engaging with men, also men in their diversity. The probably unique thing for generation equality and for the feminism of the future is its inclusiveness and the ability to embrace people in their diversity and learning to work on issues of common interest. So we, as UN Women, consider ourselves on a journey to learn because we haven't always been intergenerational. So pardon where we make mistakes, but I mean, this is a lesson and it's so important for our survival.
Thank you so much. And Everjoice, welcome back. So I'd love to hand it back over to you to share with us your thoughts. We're all very much victims of our technology and whatever it chooses to do.
My sincere apologies about that.
No
I
problem.
hope you can hear me clearly.
We can indeed.
And there isn't an echo because now I have 2 gadgets that are running at the same time. So I hope there isn't an echo that comes through. I'm just getting ready. So thanks colleagues. So I would just say a couple of things. I think one is what I was saying, that emergencies like the one we are living right now present both challenges as well as opportunities. And I think I have seen a lot more opportunity in terms of how women's groups, young women's groups have been able to organize and put some issues on the agenda. But I think also picking up from what some of the colleagues have already said, for me, one of the important things is there are lots of issues that, we are spotlighting right now. One, of course, which is, gender-based violence, which, across the world has been one of the big issues. But I want to say it's one of the oldest issues, right? That the women's movement has always been, working on. What perhaps has changed are the nuances, are some of the political shifts that have happened in different countries, ways in which governments might be responding, to the violence. And of course, the particular circumstances of, COVID-19 certainly have, their own dynamics. But basically, at the heart of it, in terms of the fundamentals, I think we are still dealing with the same old pardon the expression, the same old, violence against women, gender-based violence as we have known it, that we've been, campaigning around for a very long time. I think the second thing I want to say is, again, every single fault line that as feminists we have raised for a very long time, some of us, and which are being picked up a lot, in the current moment. Some of these, older feminists have researched on, have campaigned on, and have proffered solutions and alternatives, right? Both in terms of policy, in terms of legislation, in many, many countries, and of course at the global level. And so I think it's very important that in this moment, we look at some of that knowledge, recover some of that knowledge, pick up on some of those alternatives that have been proposed, by older generations, by older feminists, as solutions to whatever problems that we are currently facing. Again, whether it's, gender-based violence, whether it's the current, economic crisis that we are seeing across the world, or some of the social, struggles that we are seeing across the world. So let's use the alternatives. Let's use some of the solutions that have been researched and that have been proffered, by activists before. I think lastly is to say, for me, what's been very interesting about the moment is some of the lessons that could be learned by the global North from the global South. Right? So what am I talking about? In the global South, we've had pandemics, HIV and AIDS, being one in this particular region where I sit, in terms of, how we've mobilized and organized as women living with HIV, as people affected by HIV and AIDS. We've had Ebola in this region as well, right? Before this, we've had economic structure adjustment programs. We have had, massive impacts and cuts on budgets, on state expenditures. We've had our health systems collapsing and not being able to cope. And so we have generated a whole lot of learning, again, a lot of alternatives, a lot of policy propositions from the global South. And I think this is the moment where I feel the global North, some of our activist movements and sisters need to be learning, what has worked from the global South, what have we been experiencing, and how have we been organizing around some of these issues that perhaps are looking as if they are new, but basically, is the same, again, fundamental issues of gender inequality, of exclusion, of race and racism, that many of us have experienced in the global South. So a lot more learning, from the global South to the global North in this particular moment.
I have a question for you, Ejin and Sarah. So the ED mentioned the idea of succession planning, and clearly there's this need for young people to step into leadership, and also for other voices, as you've mentioned, Everjoice. And so I wonder, Ejin, starting with you, from your experience, what inspired you to get involved? For what reasons do you stay involved? Because it's hard work. And, if you were to sort of think about bringing in someone new voices, what do you think we need to do in order to support that happening?
Okay, what inspired me was back in 2018, I was still in high school. And in Malaysia, there has always been child marriages in Malaysia, but the news suddenly blew up in 2018 when a 41-year-old man married a 14-year-old girl, if I'm not mistaken. So that really captured a lot of people's attention. It was in mainstream news, and a lot of people were appalled by that, because some of us, we don't really realize that it's happening in Malaysia, where we're considered a quite developed country. So it was there where I learned about child marriages, and it is a form of child abuse that no child should be subjected to, because they are denied opportunities of education, and it is harmful for their reproductive health. So I participated in an advocacy workshop that was organized by WAGS. And from there, I learned a lot, like how to identify root causes of child marriage, and how do we end them? How do you structure your campaign? Who do you contact? Who are your decision-making people in parliament that you should advocate for, lobby this idea to? So that was where I started gaining this idea of gender-based violence, and that I want to commit to it. Because personally, I'm pretty sure a lot of young people also face this. I used to struggle with the idea of debt aid because I'm just one person in the entire world. Realistically, how much impact can I bring? But then when I realized that if I can empower just one young person, I can start off a reaction chain. That young person will go on to empower those around him or her, brothers, sisters, friends, family members, etc. And that motivates me to continue pushing new boundaries. Because if everyone thought that, oh, how much can I do? How much of impact can I bring to this world? Then we wouldn't have achieved what we have today. Of course, we still have a long way to go. And if everyone can think in a way that if I can empower just one person today, then I think we can really go a long way. And yeah, I'll pass it on to Sarah.
That was an amazing answer. It's a bit harder to follow up to. No, but it's kind of true. It's also because I've been a Girl Guide for most of my life now, and I've just realized how lucky I am that I was growing up in a very safe society, you could call it like that. But after my high school, when I graduated, I went back to my second home because I'm half Egyptian, and I went to my family in Egypt and lived there for a while. And I also realized that it's very different on how women are being viewed in some certain cases, or also on what we have to face there, especially in a very different culture. So growing up in a very northern country, Austria, it was a bit of a shock for me. And when I came home, even though it's my family and I know, yeah, it's quite a different experience, I realized that I'm actually able to change something. And I was lucky that Wax grabbed me by the hand when I asked if I could do something. And I felt like this is an opportunity because I am able to speak up. And I also learned from the session last, like 2 days ago or 3 days ago, from Ruth, who was also on the panel, where she was saying that we need to encourage ourselves to speak up, because this is the opportunity where we can reach out to a lot of young people and also to those that are really interested. And so we shouldn't be afraid on stepping up and voicing our concerns, because we really need to do this. This is our society where we live in. And I think this is also why, yeah, we just need to focus on it and work together. And that's also what keeps me going.
Thank you both so much. I wonder, Everjoice or Phumzile, if you have any responses to what you've just heard, you know, looking at it from sort of the other side as someone who might be a partner with these young leaders. Phumzile, then Everjoice.
Sorry, I didn't hear.
So we're talking about the notion of what inspires people and keeps young people in particular motivated. And I'm wondering about your views on the importance of partnership. So it's a bit of a distinction from, you know, a young leader versus a more experienced leader, but this notion of partnership together.
Yeah, thanks. Well, you know, just the size of the challenge that we are facing suggests that there is nobody who has all the answers. And if you consider that gender inequality and the abuse of the rights of women happen everywhere, from birth to death, every stage of one's life, every walk of life, and none of us and no organization can be everywhere all the time. So the art of cultivating partnerships, and this is something that I think is important for the young people on the call, to make it as just part of their toolbox. That wherever you are, always try to see how you could create partnerships and people that you can work with, including people that you disagree with. Learn to leverage and choose your fights so that you are not on a perpetual war path. Leverage some possibilities to collaborate for the greater good, because the field is so much. I think one thing that also informed us at UN Women to work with men, for instance, something that as a young feminist I would not think of, and I'm glad that you are coming at this from a totally different perspective, was this realization that this is a constituency and this is their trouble. This is the struggle of men's oppression of women. This is violence of men against women. And not to have a way of engaging men in a deep and a meaningful way is actually detrimental to the vision we have about society. So yeah, so you can find partnership everywhere, and always, however, be very clear what you want in this partnership, so that you are not the one who gets co-opted and your dream and your vision becomes bled. Not that you have to impose your dream. Sometimes it's important you impose your dream on others, but that you find a win-win to the extent. When it comes to human rights, there isn't a win-win. You have to stick your guns and really work for human rights.
Thank you. So we have a number of questions coming in through chat. Before we go to questions from the rest of the group, I want to offer to you, Sarah, Ejin, Everjoice, Phumzile, if you have questions of each other that you'd like to ask, that's certainly welcome now, or we can turn to some of the questions in chat.
I would have a quick question to Everjoice.
Yeah, please.
It's about how to keep on the fight. I think this is something, because you have a lot of experience, and I think it wasn't an easy path. And I think for us young women, it's amazing because you are the ones that set the path for us. And I have a high respect for every woman who's doing this also for us and our children. And yeah.
That's a great, question. And it's interesting for me to be answering that question today during the 16 days of activism, because I want to give that as an example. I was part of the group of 24 women who conceptualized the whole idea of the 16 days of activism back in 1991. We never, ever imagined that this campaign would be what it has become. To tell you the truth, I personally, maybe some of my colleagues did, I never, ever dreamt that we would be where we are today. Back in the 90s, we had to fight even with our own governments to be taken seriously when we were talking about violence against women. I remember going to the UN conference, on human rights in '93 to Vienna. And I remember one particular government minister calling us aside and said, "Don't be silly. You don't come here to talk about domestic issues," right? And here we are, So if you ever feel like change is slow, change is not happening, I think there is an example for you of what feminist activism, feminist ideas, feminists setting the agendas, can do. Secondly, I wanted to pick up on something that Ejin mentioned, the whole idea of what difference can I make as an individual? One of the biggest advantages that you all have in this moment is, of course, the internet, right? With all the problems that we know, the violence, the harassment, right? The lack of access for, certain groups, the marginalization, etc. But where you are able to have that tool in your hands, you and your iPhone, you and your, Huawei can make such a difference, right? Just sitting there, doing whatever you're doing and decided you're going to get into a discussion or you're going to put something out there on the agenda. This is something that, in our generation, we didn't have. if you wanted anything to be in the mass media, you had to go beg, the national radio station, you had to pay for airtime, you had to pay for space in the newspapers, and then sometimes you would just be, relegated to page 15 and to one paragraph in a whole 55-page newspaper. Now, just think about the amazing power and opportunity that you have to communicate, to campaign, to connect, to build movement, using the digital technologies. And certainly that is one of the things that I am very, let me say, envious, but also I can see that young women are making a great deal, use of, with all of the problems, and I'm not, and I don't mean to downplay them. So for me, it's the difference that you can make as an individual. You have to be deliberate about it. You have to think about it. What am I putting out there on any given day? But secondly, and more importantly, I think it's also important to remember that as much as you can make that difference as an individual, and I'm not contradicting myself, I think it's important to remember that it is collectives that will make you have even much greater power. So the whole idea of partnerships that Sis Phumzile was talking about, the whole idea of working with others, the whole idea of, building movements, right, that we're talking about. So you have to make that connection, because as an individual, yes, you can make a great deal of a difference, as I was saying earlier, but for that difference to be even bigger and even be greater and to be sustainable and to provide you with the safety and protection, you then need to connect with others, to partner with others in what we call, movement building. And that's where, it becomes even more important.
Thank you, Phumzile. I wonder if you have any thoughts about Sarah's question.
Yeah, just to build on what Everjoice just said, there's an African saying that if you want to go far, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. But you may slow down as you are going with others. But that is when your journey will really be solid and will take you far. So as young people, the importance of being able to work together, and you as young people being a collective and then being part of other collectives is important for going far and not going alone fast. I can just imagine, because hindsight is the best teacher. Now that we've lived long and we look back, I can just see that there were so many things I would have wanted to do differently by myself. But I now see the wisdom of having been part of collectives, because as Everjoice was saying, you have other people to lean on, because it's never an easy journey. As young people also, you need to recognize that in every generation, the world has a chance to start again. So you should leverage youthfulness, which is the phase that is passing. Don't waste it, because you can actually make a signature of what you want the future to be, to the extent that if we have generation equality, which is taking further a program that was started 25 years in Beijing, which doesn't have to be exactly the same as we go into the future. We have to take on board what is happening now. It will take you as a generation to also stamp your signature, your needs, your dreams, your whatever, and give it your slant. So generation equality is that moment where we have this, not giving the baton, because we still have to stay running together, but making sure that the considerations that are coming with the younger people are front and center. in this new generation. So you need to be loud in generation. And sometimes maybe, you know, we will be like, oh my God, but you know what? That's when change happens. When you're keeping everybody on their toes. You will, quiet girls never make history. Loud girls who really push. Those are the people who bring about the changes that we need.
Thank you so much. So let's turn to some questions in chat. So related to being loud girls who can make change, Natalia asks, and I think maybe we'll direct this to Ruth and Ejin. So Natalia asks, in your view, what are some of the barriers that keep young people away from engagement? So what might prevent that loud voice from issuing forth? So Ejin, let's start with you, and then Sarah.
I think intergenerational discrimination is one of the biggest challenges that we face as young people trying to push for changes. I've noticed that there's this belief that young people don't know what they're doing, young people don't have enough experience, and the classic millennial stereotypes, lazy, entitled, attention-seeking, not trustworthy, unreliable. So back in 2018, when I mentioned that I was advocating for ending child marriage with the Girl Guides in Malaysia, we made a lot of impact. We collected 156,000 signatures for a petition. We handed it over to politicians, members of parliament, and a lot of states agreed to amend the laws on child marriage, where they increased the minimum age to 18. But there were still a lot of comments on our social media pages, that Girl Guides of Malaysia shouldn't be involved in this kind of things. We should instead stay in our lanes as uniform bodies in school. So as you can see, there are still a lot of doubts and criticisms from the public, even after we have proven that we are capable of bringing change and that we want to bring change. And another problem that I see is that there is also a lack of representation and role models that girls can look up to. Research has shown that most girls and young women are ready to take on leadership positions, but they're often denied the opportunity to do so. So this leads to a lack of gender representation or diversity in decision-making processes, and girls and young women are left out from the discussion. This would also mean that we lack role models for other girls and young women to look up to, who they can identify and relate to. And I think another issue is on social media. So I think Everjoice mentioned that social media is it's very useful and effective in transmitting information, raising public awareness. It is true, social media has made creating content, sharing content terribly easy. In fact, I've seen a lot of, when TikTok was blowing up, despite its controversy, a lot of young people were leveraging on its platform to raise awareness on sexual harassment, domestic abuse, and etc. But the problem is that a lot of people forget that in a virtual sphere, behind online usernames are real people with real feelings. And so people can be harsher on virtual communities, and respect for each other has become rare, and hate comments are very, very common. So I think with a support system, with a good and strong support system, young people won't feel alone in this fight against gender inequality, and it helps to keep them empowered.
Thank you so much. Sarah, what are your thoughts about this?
Yes. So I think one of the things is also that we need to mention is that we're often told, like, when you're older, you will understand, you will have the knowledge. So you're still young, you don't have any idea of what's going on in the world, and like you can try to change things, but just give up. So I think this is one of the rhetorics that we need to get rid of and see, because there is a lot of change happening. I think also Greta Thunberg, she's a great example of what you can do when you're young and what momentum you can create. So another thing that I think that is very important that we need to spotlight is that a lot of young people are afraid of making mistakes. So you have to allow yourself to do mistakes. And so when you're trying to apply for a job or run for any position, you need to acknowledge that you can't do everything. but you will be able to do the best out of the situation, I guess. And I think this is, yeah, something very important. And another thing is also that a lot of young people don't know how to join something or where to join. And then there is a lot of like expectations on young women, what they have to deliver, and that they have to study very hard, and that they have to have jobs, or that they have to work for their family or in their community. And I think we have to change the expectations on women. So that's very simple, because that's pushing them so hard into a certain position where they cannot join actually something that is really fulfilling them.
Thank you, Sarah. Your comment reminds me of something that we often say, which is that innovation's constant companion is failure. You can't have one without the other. So a question from Karen here, and Everjoice, maybe this one to you first. So there are so many causes that require our attention today: disability, inclusion, humanitarian assistance, climate change, and so much more. How do we make it easy for people to become active in the space of gender equality?
That's another good question. One of the things that we have to keep reminding ourselves as activists is that people don't live their lives in issue silos, right? So you're not a woman with a disability on Monday and you have HIV on Tuesday and you have been impacted by a cyclone on Wednesday, and on Thursday you are in the Mothers Union. You are the same person from Sunday to Saturday, right? And so all of these issues, and that's why we talk about, intersectional feminism. That's why we're talking about it. All of those issues are connected. We experience them at the same time, right? Some of us more than others, depending on who you are, where you're located. And so it is one of those things, I think, thanks to young women, our generation is learning this whole idea of, intersectional feminism, because in our time, in the 80s, the magic bullet was women's education. You educate a woman, you've educated a nation, right? And so we threw everything we had into girls' education, into adult literacy. So that was the magic bullet that was going to get us out of poverty. And then, it didn't quite get there. And then, later on in the 90s, it was economic empowerment, income generating activities and women having their own income. And then, we woke up and we said, but women are still getting violated in the home, right? we kept searching for the magic bullet. So what I'm saying is that there isn't a magic bullet a magic solution that is going to be the be all and end all. I think we have to find the opportunities as they present themselves. We have to, look at these issues as they come together. But I think more importantly, again, it comes back to how we choose to organize, right? We can choose to come together as different movements, right? Cross movement, cross issue, and connect with each other. So it doesn't mean that you always have to do everything, right? As yourself. I think that's very, very important. And to acknowledge others who are in the same space. Sometimes they may not necessarily be as feminist, right, as you are. But sometimes you need to build those bridges, find some common ground and share strategies and, refer partners, people we work with to one another. Because you are right, there are just so many issues out there. But we have to learn to organize in a cross, issue way, in a cross movement way, and connect with others. Because even with all of the financial resources in the world, we are not going to be able to solve all of those problems at the same time as single organizations or even, larger movements. And so working with each other, finding partnerships, as well as, again, being intersectional and being intentionally intersectional in our approaches is also what will help us to deal with some of those issues.
We have time for just one question, and this is related, Phumzile, to something that you brought up. So this is from Osama. He says, as men, how can we contribute to reaching the awareness of the largest number of people, especially in the presence of a stereotype of men in the Middle East, that they do not have to be supporters of equality issues because they are specific to women? What have you noticed that can be communicated and or can be done to change some of these stereotypes?
It's important that men like Osama don't give up because the actions that they take, which does not reinforce toxic masculinity, is a masterclass for someone to learn from and to observe. It's also important that men who are gender conscious are not bystanders. President Mandela used to say, when good men do nothing, there is a conspiracy against women. So every man, young and old, has to be willing to engage. You shouldn't be laughing at sexist or racist jokes because that is tacit approval. Dare to question and to create a conversation when something like that happens. But also we need to work with the institutional frameworks in our communities because they have a bigger outreach. So in UN Women, for instance, we are investing a lot in working with traditional leaders in countries where traditional leadership has a strong presence and influence. We are also working with religious leaders so that people hear it from those leaders, not from the usual suspects like you and me. It's important to sort of mix up the messenger. The government also has a responsibility to have programs for men and boys that are targeted and driven by the relevant expertise, the relevant investment made into them so that they hit where they land where they are supposed to land. So it is work that needs to be done, and he should just not give up. And every little bit counts, as we're saying. I think one of you did. I think it was Tanu said that she would have thought that it's she's poor little her. There is no poor little you. Just one of you can make a change. So he should believe that he can make a change, but and he must bring the other dudes along.
Bring them all along. I love this. So we could continue this conversation, I feel, endlessly. It's been so inspirational. Thank you all for joining us.